Hey, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of Clinic Gym Radio. I am your host, Dr. Josh Satterlee, and I am joined today by Dr. Mike Massey. Mike, how are you, buddy?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Now, Mike, where are you at? Italy, New England? Where's that accent from?
It depends on the day. Now, I born and raised in Southeast Tennessee.
All right. Now, Tennessee is interesting because half the folks have an accent and the other don't, right?
Yeah, and we can turn it on and off, which is kind of cool.
That's nice. Well, I think it makes for a richer interview. You know, it's like,
sure.
I always wish I was British because British guys can tell you the wrong information, but with that British accent, you just think it's right because it just sounds so smart, you know?
Well, and me, I don't think I have an accent until somebody tells me I do, and then it makes me self-conscious. So who knows?
There you go. Nice. Well, Mike, you're in clinical practice day to day, but you also partnered up with a buddy of yours, and you guys started something called Practice Mechanics.
Yep, we sure did.
I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about like what the goal of that is and how it started and who you're partnered up with so everybody can know, because I think for those, especially for the clinic side of the clinic gym hybrid setup, it seems to me you guys are making that side make the systems work smoother, make sure things are compliant, make sure people have the confidence to nail that down, which definitely makes it easier when you're operating out of confidence, a whole lot easier to get people to continue on to fitness. But if you're kind of wishy-washy about the clinic, then most customers will not think, hey, I want to buy more of this wishy-washiness. So exactly. I want this ongoing wishy-washy membership. So how did it all start for you guys?
It all started, I had already had sort of side entity, a side gig, teaching coding and documentation, risk management, things like that. And I wanted to take it to another level. I wanted to scale it up a little bit. I had talked to Rob. I'd known Rob for a long time, Rob Pape. And he was really working hard to develop what he calls quadrant analysis. It's his own kind of streamlined analysis, clinical of musculoskeletal cases and things like that. And he just didn't have anywhere to park it, to promote it, to build up the framework of it so he could share it with people. He taught students, from time to time, a little bit of it and, one-on-one classes and things like that, but he just never had anything to take it nationally or internationally. And so it was just, he and I had met together. I went up to visit him when he was in New York City one weekend on St. Patrick's Day. And while I was there, I said, well, why don't we just combine the two? You're looking for somewhere to march this. I'm looking for some way to scale this. Why don't we just merge the two and make it into a bigger thing so we can cover both sides? Because there's practice management people and there's clinical people, but there's never anything that does them both together and does it well. And so that was kind of our goal, is to do them both together and do them well. So
you were like, hey, man, you're making that sweet grape jelly, but it's a little too sweet. And Rob came along and said, you're making that peanut butter, but it's a little too rich. Why don't we make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich?
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's great. So you guys kind of, before I hit record, you were telling me you really come up with some processes, systems, kind of check boxes for the administrative side of operating clinic. And Rob has done a lot of things with the patient care side of the clinic. Is that right?
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah. Well, they got to be both working because there are plenty of people out there, you and I have both met, that are providing great patient care and going broke at every moment they can, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then unfortunately in our business, there's a lot of folks with wildly successful businesses that provide pretty crappy patient care.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. And it's always hard.
And that's what we want to fix. We want to build confidence. We want people to do it right.
Yeah. Well, let's dive down that path. So what strikes you about most, so if we look at kind of, you guys can work with, established practices, been in practice for 10 or 15 years, and you can work with that student right out of school.
Right.
But in your experience, if you go and talk to that group, let's say that they're either in school or they're up to their second year in practice, what really stands out or strikes you about that group of people?
That they're scared to death. They actually will come out and say it eventually if they'll admit it, but they're scared to death. They don't feel like they have the clinical skills. They don't feel like they have the admin down pat, and they go out and they just kind of wander aimlessly trying to figure it all out.
Now, that's interesting you say they're scared to death, because at least it strikes me, maybe it's just the folks we're meeting at these seminars, but man, you hear these students that have better CVs than I do. The number of continuing education classes that they're fully DNS certified A through L. Sure. They've been to McKinsey 1, 2, 3, and 9. Like, I'm looking at them going, my God, you've gone to more seminars than I did in my first 5 or 10 years in practice, and you're just graduating.
Well, and
Do
I
you
think
see
in
this
some
too?
ways,
I mean, this high level of education.
no, I was going to say, I think that's a testament to the fact that they don't know. They feel like they're grasping, they're reaching out, trying to get more and more information, more and more support, so they can be more confident when they get out there and start dealing with patients, because they just don't believe that school did it for them.
Okay. Well, so they say they're scared, and is it that they just don't have a unified maybe operating system? Is it that they, are getting hit with different diagnoses or different symptoms than what they've trained for? So if you're, as we talked about, like in school, there's so many diagnoses that are just pounded into you. AS, ankylosing spondylitis. I maybe have seen that twice in my career,
Exactly.
And yet I think there was an entire textbook that I had to read about it. And then other things like femoral nerve entrapments for me, I would see at least once a month. And I'm like, nobody ever talked about these. There wasn't even a possibility.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's just that. I think, they don't feel like they lack knowledge. I feel like they realize they lack practical knowledge, because I think school teaches everybody more to be safe, to be a safe practitioner and not represent us poorly if they can, from a clinical and administrative side, I guess. But then we realize that it's not real world experience a lot of times. And it's not practical application a lot of times. It's just the black and white words on the paper and the things they must teach us to put us out into the world to try and function safely.
Yeah. So when you have somebody like that in that first 2 years of practice, or even as a student, join up with practice mechanics, you're trying to, what do I say? They've learned everything. Here's an analogy for you. They're standing on the beach and you're telling them they're being told everything about surfing. And you guys with your program want to hold them by the hand and start walking into the water.
Yeah, exactly. Put them on the board.
You're going to get jacked up, but that's okay. I'll tell you what it's like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Now, so that's the early stage. Now, I know you also work with some older practitioners. So people that, look at me, I've been in practice for almost 15 years. And I know you work with those folks as well. What's the big issue you see them? So the young folks are scared to death, highly educated, but scared to death. I'm going to guess 15 years in practice, it's not going to be a confidence thing, right? But right. What is the big problem there?
Sometimes, though.
Yeah.
They come to us 15, 20 years in and say, I never did understand how to document, or I never did really understand how to code. I just, I had somebody good up front that helped me wander through that aimlessly till I got it right. It is a different mindset a lot of times. From a clinical side, I think what I've seen is people have been in practice for a while get a little bit routine about things, and they feel like they're not giving care. They're not analyzing people. They're seeing things that they can't, repeatedly they can't fix like they want to. And they need some sort of other guidance on how do I get a different, fresh look at people, and maybe a different, fresh treatment approach that'll get me better results, that makes me feel better about the person that walks in the door. From the admin side, they're set in their ways. What they learned a while back, they haven't really chosen to change because it's not that big of a deal unless it starts costing them money. And then when it starts costing them money, they realize they're 3 versions out. They're still on the iPhone 6 when we're down to 12 now. So right. That's how they're doing their admin.
Yeah. I mean, I was joking with you, like, folks, I say ICD-9 codes. I always say that because it's what I learned and it just rolls off my tongue like ICD-9. But, we went to ICD-10 and now is 11 fully implemented? Is it expected? What version?
11 is coming. The United States always lags the rest of the world.
Yeah. So
11 was supposed to hit next year, and it may hit in Europe and other places, but we always kind of reinvent the wheel, and we're just now figuring out 10. So we're sure not going to do 11 just yet. So I wouldn't look for it anytime soon.
All right. Well, I'm surprised they didn't just dump 11 on us in 2020 to just really put a cherry on that. That would have
been the perfect time.
Yeah. Look, it's crazy right now anyway, so just make it crazier. Well, so just the fact, like, people had to update codes and coding and what's allowed and what's not, what's expected, what's not. So if you don't mind, I'd love to kind of dive into the administrative side of what you guys do, because that's kind of your specialty area, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Sure.
So let's talk common mistakes, because I'm sure there's some folks. I guess the advantage of being young and right out of school is you don't have any habits, which is great. So therefore you don't have bad habits. You don't have good habits, but you don't have bad habits. Whereas you can change pretty quickly, right? Like you can go to a weekend seminar and completely revamp your billing and probably be more compliant. Whereas one weekend seminar for somebody who's been in practice for 12 years is maybe not going to steer that cruise ship too much, right?
Right. Exactly.
So as you analyze folks and see people joining, let's talk about maybe 3 different things you see that are very common. And so people listening can maybe check off to make sure they're in compliance or doing things correctly, not just doing things that were done like the guy who trained them or the gal that trained them beforehand, right? Funny thing, I was reading this book and it was talking about the width of railroad rails, and that here we are like extending railroads and they're the same all over the world and blah, blah, blah. And that width goes back to the width of the wagon tracks in the West when they were setting up wagons. And then those wagon tracks go back to the wagon. Why were they that wide? The rails were made that wide. The wagons were made that wide. And the reason for that is because that was the width of the ships bringing things over from Europe. And why were the ramp that came out of the ship had to be a certain width? Why was it that wide? Because that was the size that they would load carriages on. And why was it that wide? And it traces all the way back. And if you look long enough, the reason that rails are a certain width is because the door on the carriage maker for the Queen of England, the door on a shop was a certain width. And so every carriage he built had to be able to fit through there.
Wow.
And just that habitual, well, it's this wide because he told me it's that wide, and it's that wide because she told me that's wide, and she made him that wide, so I made him that wide, and then he made him that wide, and my brother made him that wide, and here we are basing the size of a freight train's wheels off of something that was built 300 years ago in England,
Right.
It's crazy, but we never look at those processes and say, why do we do it this way, other than that's the way I was trained to do it.
And that's really what it is. And the admin side of this thing is admittedly not sexy. People don't get certifications typically, and they don't celebrate that they know this new coding skill or this new documentation, shortcut or whatever.
You want to split a room?
Exactly. I mean, it's a curse. I mean, I've said that all along that I teach the most boring bunch of stuff that there is, in this profession, but you got to know it.
I teach the SFMA, and I would say that's more on the diagnostic side. And we always joke, like, how many diagnostic seminars are there? For every diagnostic seminar, there's 20 different treatment seminars, and everybody wants to get certified in treatment. It's like, shouldn't that come after diagnosis?
Exactly.
But that's just not how we've always trained. Mm-hmm. Because treatment's where the money is. I mean, even you look at the medical industry, like the drugs and the surgical implants and all those different products are on the treatment end, and that who has the money, and therefore they're teaching everybody how to treat that way. But no, they're not really teaching diagnosis either.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about it. So 3 common problems on the admin side.
I guess we can start out with EHR because that's kind of the elephant in the room always. Everybody loves EHR because that's made our lives supposedly easy and more accurate.
One-click notes, baby.
But because of that, it's made us very lazy. It's caused us to create some poorly compliant notes and lots of words that say nothing, a lot of times, and you miss details that are important, both from a clinical, payment side and also from a risk management side too. So
I know you've done a little bit of legal work. For those listening who think, it's not a big deal, nobody's ever asked for my notes, I don't even know why I keep them, or they don't do them at all, or whatever, and there might have been a point in my life where I might have had that attitude. I mean, I don't know what the statute of limitations is, but I think we've exceeded it. But
you can say
when it does get to that legal point, like, walk us through what the legal aspect looks like so somebody can understand why those documents are so important.
Well, from the legal side, and when they get your documents, they're going to get them all. They're going to get the patient's intake information, their demographics, however they filled out a form. If you've got the form, they're going to try and get it. And then they're going to correlate that to what your decision-making was. And did you actually read the form when the patient filled it out, or did you ignore all that and just go on your own direction? And a lot of times there's a contradiction between what the patient said or the patient related as far as maybe a red flag or something like that, and where the doctor never noted it and never made it any, paid attention to it or whatever. And that comes out in court. And that they magnify that and they say, well, if you missed that, then what else did you miss? That kind of thing. Yeah. But also, the whole idea of cloning the notes where you can actually copy one and carry it forward and just change whatever's different. You do that enough times, it looks like you didn't really do anything, and that gets brought out in court too. You cloned it. It wasn't a detail thing. It wasn't something you did that was meaningful and contemporaneous in your practice. And so it was just a click of a button and you got the same thing the next time.
Yeah. Which, it's a, what do they call that? A tempting mistress, right? Like it's like, hey, I know you're busy. All you got to do is just click that button and it'll just carry everything forward. And I've reviewed some records before, and at one time we saw 23 notes that were identical in order, and I just think you present that to any jury or anybody that's evaluating you and you say, oh yeah, I provide great care. Well, what does it look like on paper? And it looks like 23 versions of cut and paste. I mean, you couldn't turn that in second grade, right? Like it wouldn't work. And here you're supposed to be a trained physician.
You're plagiarizing yourself.
Yeah, there you go.
But
and it just looks like the patient isn't progressing. People make an argument. Why would I pay for this? You said they had, a 6 out of 10 pain that was achy and dull. And 22 visits later, they had a 6 out of 10 pain that was achy and dull. And you did exactly the same treatment. You did exactly the same test results. And why would we pay for that? It doesn't look like anything's changing. I mean, if I told you, hey, Mike, I'm going to send a plumber to your house. He's good. He's going to show up 11 times. He's going to attempt to unplug the toilet. And, you're going to pay for that?
He's going to do it the same way every time and get the same result every time.
He's going to give you the same receipt at the end that says, hey,
he's going to tell you it was fine.
Yeah.
Tell you it's done. But that's what we do a lot of times too. To expand on the note you were talking about, the clone thing, you'll have the same pain scale. You have the same objective findings, supposedly the same orthopedic test, which you don't really do every visit most of the time. And then also say the patient's progressing positively. The patient's getting better every visit. Well, 6 visits later, their pain scale is the same. Their findings were exactly the same. How can you say they're better if you got nothing to acknowledge that? That's just crazy.
Yeah. It's crazy.
And that comes up on a payment and a legal side. I mean, those are both critical. Right.
And one of the perspectives that people might need to have too is once one of your cases gets cracked open, it's tough to not, how do I say this? The assumption of your habits in the legal industry carries some weight. So if you habitually do copy paste, then it's hard to say like that you operate a totally different way in some other aspect. And they'll say, well, if you did that, like you're saying, and a major insurer comes through like Blue Cross or something and says, well, these notes were crappy the first time we asked. Why don't we look at some other ones? Because, maybe we overpaid. And you'll see oftentimes people get these letters from insurance companies where like, hey, we think we overpaid you $24,000. Please write us a check within 3 weeks. Thank you very much. And it's like, slow down.
Insurance auditors are notoriously detailed, but also notoriously lazy. And that comes down to what you're saying. If they find blood in the water, if they get you a time or two and they know that you're really charging for more than you really did, they're going to keep coming back until they can't find anything else. They're
going to fight your laziness with their laziness.
Yeah. Because they're never going to look for somebody else when they've got a fertile garden right here they can pick from, Yeah. And they're just going to keep on picking until there's no fruit left.
Right. Yeah. And once like you said, blood in the water, once Blue Cross does that, and let's say, United hears wind of it and they're like, well, we'll look too, because again, habitually that person did a certain aspect. So, I hope that nobody listening ever has to go through that. It sucks. There's just nothing fun about that, but holy smokes, will it make your system a little bit better, because hopefully you survive it and realize we should do things better. So, that's the beauty and the downside of an EHR, right? But what are some ways people can use an EHR well? Like, what are some things you should make sure you ensure that happen to make sure that when your notes get requested, you're not looking like you got caught with your pants down?
Well, I think they just make it easier to be thorough, things that you might overlook or you might scribble, illegibly or something like that in passing. If you really use the EHR like it's supposed to be used, you're going to get a clean note that says what you wanted it to say in a way that you wanted it said. Now, I mean, even then, a lot of them sound like robots wrote them. It doesn't sound like I would speak, sometimes when I read the notes that are generated by my EHR, I'm like, I don't say that.
Tennessee drawl either.
But, you get the information in there. They're very straightforward, and that's good. But they also can reveal, if you self-audit, if you're smart enough and thorough enough to self-audit, you can find things too in an EHR you wouldn't find by going through your own notes, because you'd be it wouldn't glare at you probably so much, which is a nice thing too. But
one advantage too, now a lot of the systems allow you to input a picture or video, which for, I'm thinking like Hawkins Kennedy test for the shoulder is notoriously inaccurate. And it's, saying that that's positive. Well, almost everybody I know will be positive. You just crank their shoulder enough, but getting a film of where that's positive will take 3 seconds and it might show significant improvement. And then even if the records aren't laying that out clearly, like being able to show a auditor and saying, this is where we started and this is where we were 5 visits later, that carries a lot of weight.
Yeah, I mean, still photos too. I've seen those come in handy in PI cases or even malpractice defense where, somebody had some very visible bruising or very visible surface injuries, and you just take a quick picture of it and log it into the file, and you got a date certain that, it wasn't like they're making it up or it happened another time or whatever. Those are really nice, clean things you can do with those too.
Because if those listening hear this, like attorneys love MRI results, love them.
Yeah.
And really all that is just a still frame picture that has some technical language around it. But I had a friend that got denied a bunch of care for a patient that, thinking about this, that had what looked like complete disc issue. And then they got an MRI and it was like 2 millimeters at L3 or something. It was an atypical location, but like a 3 millimeter bulge. It wasn't anything bad. But to your point, they'd taken still pictures of that person completely antalgic, and the antalgia was aggressive. I mean, you were expecting a, 20 millimeter herniation or something, and they didn't have that. And, but that carried a lot of weight in getting that person's recovery. They had them kind of up against a posture grid and they were shifted over like 6 inches, and then 10 visits later, 2 inches, and then 10 visits later, they were basically back to stacked posture. But just had he not taken those 3 pictures, and how long does it take to take a picture?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you don't have to publish it to Instagram or anything. Like, this is just real simple pick, and certainly made the case for him why he provided so much treatment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are good. I mean, they're good.
So that's regarding EHR. What about, common one that you mentioned before was gaps in care, right? So you got some folks been in practice for a long time, and I don't know about you, but like how long you been in practice? 600 years?
Yeah, at least 600. It feels like 600 sometimes today.
Yeah. How many years? I didn't hear that.
30.
30. Awesome, Mike. Well, is there, do you still actively see people you saw that you started as new patients 15, 20 years ago?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's a common kind of mistake people make when they see those folks? Because, I mean, I'm guessing if somebody's been in your practice 20 years, Mike, you've seen them for a dozen different injuries, essentially.
Potentially, yeah. Or the same thing repeatedly too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the mistake a lot of people make is complacency in that regard. If you've seen somebody, you're familiar with them, you know their case, they skip some time, they're down, they're gone for a year, 2, 3, 5, 7, and they call and make an appointment, come in, and lazily, a lot of people go, I know that person. I know what they've got. If it's the same condition, it's the same thing they've always had, and they just continue their treatment as if they never missed a beat. And that's when you miss things. That's when things become a liability, because a lot of things can happen in that downtime. And, there's got to be a date certain that you set that, when somebody comes in after a gap, that they've got to be evaluated a little bit more thoroughly. And most people don't, or a lot of people don't anyway. We see a lot of that in the medical legal side, is those gaps in care can come back to bite you if you don't take care of them.
So you said what you got to set up is a date span that no matter what, they get a re-exam. Right. That's the solution. And what's a suggested range there? 6 months?
I think 6 months is not a bad one. And it all really depends on the history. If it's a completely new condition when they come in 6 months or 3 months, then you got to look at that a little differently too. If it's the same old song and dance and they evaluate the same, then you carry forward.
Well, here's a common one. Somebody comes into you for low back pain, right? And let's say you evaluate it, you're 6 visits in, and I've had this, especially with women, and they go, hey, this is great. By the way, I didn't mention it before, but I also get a headache every day or every other day. Mm-hmm. Now, we're totally different region, right? So it's not saying hip pain and butt pain, or low back pain and tingling down the leg. So I say headache. Should you do a full workup on it? Should you document that? How do we do that?
All the above. Headaches especially can be dangerous. I'm just saying, you don't just jump from the low back to, oh, I've got a headache that you've never treated before and just reach up there and go, oh, well, it's C1, bing, bang, and you crack that thing.
Well, you say not to do that, Mike, but I would guess that one or two people listening have actually done that.
Sure they have.
I mean, not you, not me, not our favorite listeners, but, but it's pretty common because that person. And I think that, one of the more difficult parts of our business is the fact that you are human. You have empathy for your patients. You care about them. And on the flip side is you feel comfortable. You feel comfortable that you understand their systems, even though you only evaluated a low back. Right.
Well, and the resistance to this comes from people imply that, oh, I'm making you stop and do a full on workup on this person. No, you just got to do what's safe. You got to rule out the red flags. You got to check some stuff, just enough to make you comfortable and confident to move forward instead of just reaching up there and doing it because they were there and they wanted it,
Yeah. Okay. And if we take that 6-month thing, somebody comes in for headaches and let's say 7 months later comes back for headaches again, how much of a workup do I need to do?
The same. Well, obviously you don't get the whole demographic thing and go through a full case history or anything like that, but you want to ask the right questions about, has it changed and has it come and gone and how severe has it been? And, the history is really critical. It's probably many times more critical than the exam. Mm-hmm. And then you check some things, that would rule out things that you don't want to deal with, and just make sure those are gone, yellows and reds.
So just to put some hard borders on this, if I spent 10 full minutes asking about history their first time, I should attempt to spend another 10 the second time. And
I think after, go ahead.
If I did 4 different orthopedic or neurological tests the first time, I should plan to do 4 again. I'm just arbitrarily assigning numbers here, but.
Yeah, I think you're on something. It needs to look very similar because it could be different, and that's how we miss things, is by not paying attention. And so we have to check them anyway. You can't assume they're not there this time if they weren't there the first time.
Yeah. I know you're perfect, Mike, but I'm not. And I had recently had an experience with a friend who I've treated in the past, probably every couple of years, for low back pain. We don't live in the same town, so we'd see each other at conferences and stuff. And the last time I treated him, he just didn't get any relief, not anything long-term. And he'd been treated by everybody. And, he acted like a disc pain patient. I thought he had some components of hip. We get an MRI of his hip, it's clean. Get an MRI of his back, it's essentially clean. He gets injections, they don't help. He goes through everybody specializing in hips and backs. And turns out everybody, including myself, had missed the colon cancer that had started raging.
Whoa.
Yeah. And luckily his primary care at some point stopped and kind of peeled the onion away and said, all right, what has changed in the last 3 months? And, it's all procedure. He's listing all these procedures, but she was smart enough to realize, okay, you're just listing stuff that hasn't worked. So she goes, there's no way you had that much musculoskeletal care and it wasn't the right kind, There's probably an internal thing. And she said, she asked some red flag questions. He's like, oh, yeah, there is pain at night. Yeah, it doesn't go away. Painkillers no longer touch it. And she's like, have you, any blood in your feces? And he goes, oh, yeah, that's been going on for 2 months now. And she's like, what did everybody else tell you? Oh, it was a reaction to all the Advil I was taking. Is the blood bright red or is it, digested? And he's bright red. Like, awesome. Okay, you're getting some imaging of your colon, and sure enough, they went to do a colonoscopy and they could only do about 4 inches and got stopped by a large mass. So,
wow.
Yeah, the point is the version I saw of him 2 years ago is very different than the version I saw 2 months ago, and I need to admit that to myself and have a system to just say it's worth asking some questions. Red flag screening takes 2 minutes, maybe?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So handle those gaps. That's one thing. Work up people when they come back after 6 months or a new area. Don't be lazy about your EHR. Yep. What's one more administrative tip you have?
I forgot what my third one was.
Yeah.
Do you remember what I told you?
It had to do with patient interaction and just being nice.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. That's good for, practice building, but also practice preservation. Like I told you before, many of the medical legal cases that I've dealt with that I've had to defend, almost every one of them within the patient's deposition, or at least their complaint, it was that the doctor didn't listen to them. He wasn't friendly to them. They didn't like him. He didn't seem caring. He didn't seem, understanding.
Never looked at me or shook my hand. Like,
yeah,
simple things.
And when I complained, he brushed it off. Didn't pay attention. Those are the things that make people mad. That's why you get sued, more because they're mad, not because they've got damages or whatever.
Whereas if you're nice and you're caring and you show empathy and you completely blow the diagnosis, like I did, those people typically don't sue you. I'm not saying 100% of the time, but very often don't, because they're like, hey, you're trying your best. It's understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you dismiss them, they don't like to be dismissed. People want to be heard,
Yeah. And that happens a lot in hospitals. I mean, the number of hospital lawsuits for a doctor that didn't seem nice, or nursing staff that didn't seem nice, that are launched by the kids of the patient, would blow your mind. I mean, because like, oh, they weren't nice to my mom or my grandmother, therefore they're going to pay because she's gone now. And it's like, you don't want to. Right. That's tough to defend against.
I mean, I've got an example. Yesterday, I had a new patient, pretty complex case, but I said, have you ever been to the chiropractor before? And he said, I went one time. And he said, it was a guy across town. And he said, I told him everything I just told you, and he ignored every bit of it and just treated me the way he wanted to be, he wanted to treat me. And he said, I never went back, because I could tell nothing I said mattered. He was just going to treat me his way.
Wow.
So, that's not the first time I've heard those kind of things too.
Yeah, that sucks.
How hard is that to do though? It's so crazy.
Yeah. What's interesting too, I've been on this kick of like talking about in the Facebook group and some other things about patient experience. Like, just what is the experience of walking up to your place? And I'm talking little things. Like, I was at an office the other day, and you walk into the front door and there are like leaves that have blown in from the, from the street, which, hey, it gets windy. Like, that's understandable. It's not your fault those leaves blew in, but you could see, when you start walking on leaves, how they kind of break down into pieces. You could see some of the pieces were so small that had not been swept for at least a full day. And just nobody was thinking it was their job. And I'm thinking, what's the experience here when people walk in and see those leaves, or for the second time see those leaves? And how are we talking about, what's the solution is a 10 to 30 second solution here. Like, to sweep those things out is not going to take you that long. And it's funny, if you think about I'll just challenge you with this, see if you can come up with one. Except for Walmart, I can't think of any other class leader that owns their market that doesn't focus on the experience of the customer. Like, you look at Disney is by far and away the number one amusement park operator, right? Totally focused on customer experience. Starbucks, far and away the number one, whatever you want to say, coffee house in the nation, in the world. Always focus on the experience. And by the way, for those listening thinking it's expensive, Starbucks, all they do is they just ask your name and call your name when your drink's ready, right?
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, your double espresso's ready. And it's like, ooh, they remember my name. It's like, no, they entered it in a computer and printed a label with it. But just that is a big deal.
Yeah. Practice Mechanics is not a practice management group by any means, but we do some mentoring work too. Mm-hmm. When people log in and if they want, a mentoring contract to cover whatever about their practice, we do that because both of us have had this much experience, and we can usually kind of guide people. But one of the first things I tell people to do if they feel like they're stagnant in their practice or whatever is either go and enter your office through the front door and sit in the lobby, when there's nobody there, and just have a honest look around of how you would be impressed if it was somewhere you were going to visit, or have somebody you trust very much, they'll be brutally honest with you, come in and give you the list of the things that they see that need some help. And those kind of things can change the practice overnight, literally. Change the attitude. I mean, a fresh coat of paint, a clean window, like you said, a dirty rug, change it out. Yeah.
Little things. It makes such a big difference. I remember this one lady I knew, she was big about that in her business. She was wildly successful, like hundreds of millions of dollars. Her company had grown to, and she said she hired a designer to come in and, just be honest with me about our executive office. And she said, what's with the wallpaper? And this woman, Mary, was like, we don't have wallpaper. Yeah. She's like, behind the front desk, it's like ugly wallpaper. And she's like, oh yeah, we put that in 12 years ago. And I totally forgot we have wallpaper. and I forgot that it's ugly because I've just seen it every time I walk in, and it's like that ugly wallpaper. What are your patients thinking?
Yeah,
it's just crazy.
And it's little things, they do notice though, but they're there, especially in our practices, they're there repeatedly. So they get to see if it's still there the next time, a lot of times. Have they changed that, or do they care?
Right.
I mean, I know we did facelift to our office about 3 years ago, and our practice boomed because of it, just because it was fresh. It was fresh and new and nice and modern,
There's a podcast I listened to, and the guy said, you should always have 2 big parties every year, because if nothing else, it just forces you to clean up the messes and get rid of the crap that, you would otherwise just leave on the counter or in the corner or whatever. Guests are coming over. You're like, well, we got to straighten up this picture and touch up the corners and all this stuff. And it's like, that's pretty true.
Ours is if another doctor's come into the office, we make sure everything's okay. Or if one of our family members is coming in, it's like, oh, you got to make sure it's going to be okay, because they'll tell us if it's not,
Yeah. We hired this amazing front desk woman, and she just had a motor to her she just didn't have enough work to do. I'll say it that way. She always could find stuff. And she was cleaning out our little event bag, this bag we use to go to different events and stuff, and she's like, what's this clipboard? And she pulls it out. It's all tattered and it's just sitting in a bag in our closet for, I don't know, a year and a half. Oh yeah, that's all the email addresses that we said we'd enter into our system. And that's why we went to those events, was to get email addresses, Yeah. And she's like, oh, okay. It was funny. Up to that point, we never entered them into our system. And therefore the whole reason we went out to that 5K or triathlon or whatever was completely moot. We shouldn't have even gone out. It was just burning up a Saturday morning, And she just was a cleaner, but she revealed 10 or 12 different issues we needed to face. And a lot of it was just cleaning stuff up and throwing stuff out, stuff that no longer works. Like all your spinal screening stations, Mike, you got to just at some point just get rid of them.
I know my subluxation station and my posture check station.
Yeah.
They need to be dusted off every once in a while.
You get new ones from the company or whatever,
True. Yeah, I mean, I had similar experiences with employees before. I had one that just was here last year, and she was almost OCD quality, clean freak, but the one before her was not. And so she spent the first week just organizing and setting everything in the place where we could all find it and see it and everything. Yeah. And it was great. I didn't even know it was a mess until it wasn't a mess,
Right.
And she also noticed a really cool thing, and I'll move on to something else. But
no, let's talk about this,
because past,
this is when we're talking about like be nice to patients, but showing them you care. The words can leave your mouth. You can shake their hand and everything, but showing them you care with your facility, not having cracked, vinyl on your exam tables, like those things show you care a lot too. Yeah.
One thing she noticed, and we've been doing it the one way for years. Mm-hmm. She said, and our office is not huge, but it's an L-shaped front desk with glass on 2 sides. And when somebody would come in and sign in, it was their turn. They would just say, they would just kind of motion, come on around to the door. And she said, I'm not going to do that. And she'd get up and go to the door and bring them. And it made all the difference in the world. People were like, oh, that is so nice. You're not just crazy, telling me to move around the office, that you actually came and took my hand and walked me there.
Yeah. Nordstrom's like the department store. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever been in one, but the checkout counters are kind of in the middle of the close area. They're not like, and they're fairly high. They're stand-up desks with a fairly high counter. And they're taught, once you throw everything in the bag and you put your receipt in there, they are to walk your bag around to you, which is literally a 4-foot walk. Right? We're not talking about far, but they hand it to you. And, that's one thing. Again, that company is known for amazing customer service. And really, how long does that take? And how much better is that than lifting that big bag over the counter into your face? It's just like, it's such a better experience. And how many times do we not do that for our patients? So I love the fact that you guys address that.
Yeah. That's cool stuff.
Yeah. Any other common things when you're mentoring folks? So I think you said, number one, just walk in the front door, act like a patient would act. That's another thing, by the way. This is a pet peeve of mine. I hate when people have a very confusing office to get to, but they figured it out because they've got there 1,000 times. But then they just throw out the addresses. Oh yeah, Mike, it's just 3846 Westville Road. And you're like, okay, you're behind another building. It's hard to find. Like, how would you tell your grandmother to get there, over the phone? You'd probably say, now look for the McDonald's, just past that, there's a driveway, make a right. Like just figuring that out and making sure your employees have an understanding of how to tell people to get there.
Exactly.
Like it's not that hard.
Nope.
Yeah. So what are some other things you notice in your mentoring?
Phone skills are another one. I mean, for front office, at least, just like you would have somebody come in your front door and sit in your lobby, have somebody call and see how they're treated. That first impression is the one they get a lot of times. And so we make sure people train and their people. And if they're the ones answering it, they're answering it not in a way that you're going to drive away people. It's critical.
Yeah. It's huge. And the phone can make so much money for an office. If I were opening an office and trying to fill it, I would treat the phone as a gold bar of $1 million sitting there on the desk, because it'll do that for you. Or like you said, it'll turn it away. I've had a lot of people that, I was going to come, but I called and they were, I remember having that. We had a front desk employee that was not the right fit. And I didn't realize that until a couple people gave us low feedback on our, scale us on a 1 to 5, and we started getting 3s and 2s. And I'm like, that has never happened. And then I had a couple people that said, I was going to come in. I called, but the lady was kind of rude. And so, I decided to put it off. And I'm like, was it rude at our place? Mm-hmm. And this woman was super sweet when she was back with the doctors, but just a raging bee when she was up front alone. And,
wow.
But I would never know that because she was always nice to me.
Sure. Yeah.
Turns out I pay her though. So she had reason to be nice to me. Yeah, that's pretty common. So yeah, I think on both of those, one thing I'm hearing a commonality is have somebody that will give you honest feedback, won't hold back. Go through your patient experience. What's it like when you first walk in? What do you notice? Is there, a tattered rug or something fixed with duct tape or something like that?
Yep.
Second thing, have them call up and try and schedule as a new patient. And how does that go? Is it warm and welcoming? Are the people good? And it just, it can make or break a business so much. And in our game, like those first 2 years of practice, if you're just, I don't know if you remember those days from your experience, but if you followed up with everybody that you ever met or ever said they wanted to come in, and if you just doubled down on the patient experience those first time, I think you'd fill up twice as fast. Mm-hmm. I really do.
It's absolutely true.
Yeah. But unfortunately, we're struggling with thinking what's the next seminar I need to go to? And it's like, I don't know, but I know it has to do with customer service.
Well, and another thing too on this subject is giving hope. I've run into that just in the last, 6, 8, 12 months here at the office. Several people have said, I've been a bunch of different places. I didn't really know what was wrong. Whoever I was treated by didn't really feel like they had a grip either. And you might not know, but you gave me hope that I was going to be okay. I mean, just that simple. Yeah. Telling somebody, I think you're going to be all right. This is fixable. Wow. So nobody's told them they were fixable up until that point. They were broken, Yeah. So that's another.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, because that'll build trust in a person like crazy, and I'm sure you'll get tons of referrals from those folks if you're the only one just kind of being clear about things. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Well, Mike, if somebody's listening and they really enjoyed the things you're talking about and they want to know more about Practice Mechanics, where can they find you guys?
We've got a website, practice-mechanics.com. We have a Facebook page. We have a Twitter account. We don't use a lot, but we will.
Twitter's Instagram only used when you're angry, so you don't need to use it.
Instagram, and we actually signed up for TikTok and haven't used it yet, but we have that too.
Okay.
We think we might at some point.
So practice-mechanics.com. And is the Facebook group, is it private or is it an open Facebook group?
No, we have a Facebook page. Once you become a member, we have a private group for that. Okay. And then we interact with those guys on the side.
Fantastic. All right, Mike. Well, this has been a absolute pleasure, Mike. I love talking to you. And for those folks listening, like cleaning up that admin side, it'd probably take 3 months of some dedicated work, but your office will run so much smoother and you'll be able to sleep at night knowing that there's not going to be a insurance audit on the other side.
Exactly. I mean, that's what I hear again is we don't know. We go to bed at night wondering if our claims are going to be paid tomorrow or if we're going to be audited and they're going to take our money back or whatever. It doesn't have to be like that. Doesn't have to be like that at all.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your time today, Mike. And on behalf of Dr. Mike Massey out there in beautiful Tennessee, this is Dr. Josh Satterlee saying, go out there, maximize your license, and live the life you dream of. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for checking out these videos. I hope they're useful. We'll cover things like rehab, exercise, business model, progressions, layout, everything else that helps you build a clinic. So if you're interested, you can click here, there, here, or anywhere to get more videos just like this. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you soon.